Okay, so we do have one more presentation before lunch. It's our very own Dave Williams, BLM retired geologist. He's going to talk to us, give us a presentation, Electronic Vehicles, Myths, Minerals, and Misconceptions. Dave earned his BS from Bates College in Maine and a master's in igneous and metamorphic petrology from the University of Montana. He was employee of the BLM for over 40 years. Dave and his colleague Joan Gableman were responsible for administering federal mineral laws in the Butte Field Office. He's also been responsible for some AML projects in western Montana, and his expertise includes federal mining laws, general reclamation issues, and mineral and metal exploration. I would also add that Dave was a certified mineral examiner, and please welcome Dave.
Thanks, Steve. Well, speaking of minerals, let's talk about electric vehicles. I'll start out with a disclaimer, which is there is no disclaimer. If you listen to my talk and buy an electric vehicle and don't like it, you can blame me or not. It's your choice. A bit of a disclaimer, I'll talk about electric vehicles. I will not talk about Elon Musk. Electric vehicles. Is there anybody else in this room besides me that owns an electric vehicle? One. Hybrids? A few hybrids. Anyway, so this picture is a Tesla Model Y. It is my Tesla Model Y. And I'll tell you a little bit about, I won't spend a lot of time, we've talked a little bit about minerals this morning already. I'll tell you a little bit about what the batteries are made of, what the cars are like, why it's relevant that we're thinking about electric vehicles, and then I'll take questions, and I'll be around all day, so if you have questions you are embarrassed to ask or whatever, I'm happy to answer anything. So the reason this is relevant is the transportation sector is one of the largest contributors of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And an important part of that factor is light vehicles, cars, pickups, things like that. So that's why it's relevant that we're even talking about electric vehicles, and we're not talking about electric vehicles as much as Europe is. And it is interesting from the perspective of an electric vehicle owner to see that now electric vehicles are trapped in the culture wars as well. But the fact is, they're just cars, people. They're just cars. So here's some fundamentals. Electric vehicles rely on a large battery as the energy source. There is no other energy source. When you're out of electrons, you are stopped. You can't have somebody come by with a can of gas or anything like that. When your battery reaches zero, you are not going anywhere. The battery is virtually always the bottom of the car. It's heavy. I'll talk about that in a little bit. It powers it can power either front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. There may be 1, 2, 3, or 4 electric motors delivering power to the wheels. So it's pretty straightforward in terms of how you power the vehicle. What makes up the battery? There are a whole bunch of different things that we're using for batteries now, and the makeup of the battery depends. Different battery compositions will reflect different ranges. They'll reflect different charging speeds. The battery in my car is a nickel cobalt aluminum oxide battery. It provides the car with a projected range of somewhere in the range of 300 miles. One of the batteries that the Tesla is now using and other people are now using is the lithium iron phosphate, which is a little less energy dense. It's also a little less expensive. The difference between the two is that for my car, the recommended charge rate for daily use is 80%, which means every day I start out with about 260 miles of range. The rated range on a Model Y is around 300 miles or so. So the Model 3, the Tesla Model 3 with a lithium iron phosphate battery has a range of about 260 miles. The difference is the recommendation for the battery life on those is charged to 100% every day. So really, they're starting at the same practical range. So that's, if you were looking at electric vehicles, that's a factor to consider. And also, a question to ask yourself is, how often do I drive more than 200 miles a day? That's a consideration as well. So those are some of the elements in the batteries: lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this is typical composition of a battery. A lot of graphite, a lot of aluminum, nickel, copper, manganese, cobalt, and lithium. Oops. Let's go back here. So this is a Ford Mustang Mach-E, which is one of Ford's 2 electric vehicles, and this is showing you what they have in terms of what makes up the battery. Again, it's graphite, copper, nickel, manganese, et cetera, and it does include rare earths, as we've been talking about. Now here's the relevant, in terms of threats to national security, geopolitical issues, and things like that. Look at this and see where this stuff comes from, or where it's refined or processed, and look at China. Now the thing to keep in mind is, for manganese, cobalt, lithium, aluminum, and nickel, we just don't produce much of that in the United States. And part of the reason that we don't produce much of that in the United States is we simply don't have the geology that supports that. So those are geopolitical considerations that we have to keep in mind. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, you see all that stuff that's produced from China. If you're paying attention to the news, you know that yesterday President Biden put a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. And the reason for that is Chinese electric vehicles are extremely competitive now. They are every bit as good as a Tesla Model Y, for example, but they are less expensive. And right now, China is basically flooding the European Union with electric vehicles. So the geopolitical consideration from the standpoint of Europe as well as the United States is, do we want to let China basically flood the market with vehicles and choke out their vehicle manufacturing capability, or our vehicle manufacturing capability? So those are real serious geopolitical issues, and I'm virtually confident that the European Union is going to do something similar to what we've done in terms of tariff on Chinese vehicles, because they are literally flooding the market with Chinese vehicles. And you can get, if you go to Mexico, you can buy a Chinese vehicle. BYD makes, like I say, extremely competitive electric vehicles. So one of the issues about electric vehicles is two things. They take more metals to make. So the carbon output for an electric vehicle initially is higher than a ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine vehicle. That lasts for about 10 to 15,000 miles, and then you can see from this graph that an electric vehicle is, in terms of its life cycle, is way less impacting than a gas-powered vehicle. And but it does take more metals, and the manufacturing is a little more complicated. So now let's get to a discussion about batteries. The Tesla Model Y battery weighs about 1,700 pounds. So a Tesla Model Y weighs about 4,416 pounds compared, for example, to a Subaru Outback, 3,900 pounds. And a Subaru Outback is what I had before I transitioned to electric vehicles. So a couple things about that. Once you drive an electric vehicle, you'll never go back. They are fast. They are quiet. They're really fun to drive. I transitioned from a 2020 Model Y to a 2023, and I sold it to a good friend in Hamilton who had a Camry with 200,000 miles on it. And her comment was, boy, this sure is fun to drive. So it's a different driving experience. But, like I say, they're heavy. They have a lot of torque. If you want to wear out tires, you can drive like an idiot and you can wear out tires. So that's a consideration in terms of electric vehicles. A lot of tire manufacturers are now starting to transition to tires that are specifically designed for electric vehicles. So that's something to look forward to in the future. Just some odds and ends about what electric vehicles are really like. And the Teslas in particular, because they were designed as electric vehicles from the start, they have a lot of space. On the left side is the back. That's the trunk. The seats fold down, of course. And then underneath the back of the area there's a sub-trunk. So they have a lot of room. You can carry around a lot of junk if you want. But they also have a frunk. So you can put odds and ends in the front if you need. And normally what I carry in there is my charging equipment, a couple of odds and ends, and there actually is, I have a cooler in there if I'm going to carry something that needs to be cool. Because especially in the winter, if you've got something that you don't care if it freezes or not, there's no heat to this. So it's a good place to put things you want to keep them cool or they need to stay cool.
Where's your spare tire?
There's no spare tire. That's where I have a tire repair kit that I bought. Yeah, good point though. So here's some vehicle myths. Myth number one: electric vehicles are worse for the climate than gasoline cars because of power plant emissions. Myth number two: I'll just read through these. You can see them. Electric vehicles are worse for the climate than gasoline because of battery manufacturing. Like I say, that is overcome over a short period of time. Increase in electric vehicles entering the market will collapse the power grid. This is a legitimate concern. But places that have really, really effectively transitioned to electric vehicles, and the classic example of Norway is they have really transitioned to electric vehicles. The power grid is held up fine. And one thing to keep in mind, most of the time you're going to charge this at home, you're going to charge it at night. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of the power grid. There's nowhere to charge. Well, that depends a little bit. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Electric vehicles don't have enough range to handle daily travel demands. Well, as I said, if you're traveling more than 200 miles a day, a lot, you might want to think about it. Electric vehicles only come as sedans. I'll show you something about that. Electric vehicles are not as safe as comparable gasoline vehicles, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So again, we've already covered electric vehicles have a smaller carbon footprint over their lifetime by quite a bit compared to gas cars. Greenhouse gas emissions associated with an electric vehicle over its lifetime are typically lower than, et cetera, et cetera. So the charging issue, there are really two sides to this. Tesla, one of the strengths of Tesla, in fact, really the only strength of Tesla at this point is their charging network. They have an extremely well-developed charging network, and it is extremely reliable. Competing charging networks like Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint, there are a whole bunch of them. Some of them are reliable, some of them aren't. If you have a non-Tesla vehicle and you go to Electrify America and there are 2 cars there and the other 2 chargers aren't working, you're stuck. So that's something that's changing as more chargers are developed, and there are more chargers being added. But Tesla has a real advantage there, and a lot of the manufacturers are going to the Tesla charging standard, the NACS, North American Charging Standard. So that will change. Electric vehicles now come in a variety of shapes and sizes. We'll cover that right here. So from this, you can see that electric vehicles now come in a variety of shapes and sizes, including the Tesla Semi, which they will start extensive production on here in the next year or so. The pickup on the upper right is a Rivian. The pickup on the lower right is a Ford Mustang, Ford Lightning, F-150 Lightning. And then the one on the left is the Tesla Cybertruck, and that Cybertruck actually lives in Butte. So, and interestingly enough, on Monday while we were doing the field trip, while Joe Griffin and I were doing the field trip, I saw several Rivian Amazon delivery vans being trucked to the West Coast. So delivery vans are, you know, that's a perfect use for an electric vehicle, for one example. A couple other myths, the one that I didn't put in here, but I'll talk about fire. And the reality is that electric vehicles are way less likely to catch fire than a gas-powered vehicle. But when they do catch fire, it's a big deal. And so you read about it. But the reality is they don't catch fire very often. And sometimes when they catch fire, it would be no different if you were in a gas-powered vehicle. And if you've ever been around a gas-powered vehicle that's caught fire, it's an impressive thing to watch. So something to keep in mind in terms of potential risks of electric vehicles. If they do catch fire, and a lot of fire departments are aware of this now, fires can be harder to put out. So what about the driving experience? So I've been driving an electric vehicle for going on 7 years. So I started with this little red Chevy Bolt, which was a fun little vehicle. And then I had a Chevy Bolt and a Subaru Outback, and I used the Subaru Outback only when I needed all-wheel drive, when I was going up skiing, or on longer trips, because the Chevy Bolt, the charging network just did not support the Chevy Bolt doing long trips. So, and I thought about it, and I thought, geez, the Subaru is in the garage for 11 months of the year. What's the point? And so I sold the Bolt and bought a Model Y. So the driving experience, I'm a Nordic skier. If there's snow, I'm a Nordic skier, or any kind of skiing I'll do. If there's snow, I'm going skiing every day, all winter long. So I'm going up to Homestake Lodge to go skiing. I'm going up to Echo Lake or Mount Hagen or wherever. I'm going skiing almost every day, all winter long. It's a good winter car. They're heavy. I put good winter tires on it. It is a super solid winter driver. Maintenance, here's something you probably haven't thought about. In almost 7 years of owning electric vehicles, I've replaced 1 bottle of de-icer for windshield washer fluid, and I've replaced 2 sets of windshield wiper blades. That's it. So how about charging? So, like I say, I charge at home every night. I plug it in. It takes as long to plug in as it does to plug in your toaster. It's that simple. You do need to have, if you're going to be using it extensively, you need a 220 or 240 in your garage, which I had installed. But it's like I say, you just plug it in and you're ready to go the next morning. Supercharging, it depends on the Tesla will tell you how much you need to charge to get where you're going. You put all that in your navigation, it'll tell you exactly how long you need to charge for. We were over in Missoula for a meeting a month or so ago, and I needed to charge. To get back to Butte, I would have needed to charge for like 6 minutes. But we were eating lunch, so I just plugged it in until it charged up to 80%, which is what I normally charge it to. So, pretty simple. So, slide left blank to confuse you. I'll take questions.
All right, thanks, Dave. Questions for him? Yeah.
So on the analysis of the carbon footprint when comparing to a combustion engine vehicle, did it take into account replacement parts over time? Because I know you've had good luck with your Tesla, but I've heard others that have to replace the drive motors like after 150,000 miles, and other major components that have a bit, that are large components within those vehicles. So I was just curious if it took into account the long-term maintenance.
No, that happens, but I think it's probably no different than any other car manufacturer. The long-term, battery failures, things like that, Some of those are covered under warranty. But there are Teslas, there are Teslas with over 500,000 miles, and the highest mileage Tesla is 1.24 million miles. So, but sure, there are things that can happen that where things go to hell in a handbasket. But typically maintenance costs are extremely low, and when something like that happens, like if the battery fails, battery replacement, if you were out of warranty, would be pretty damn expensive, but it's pretty rare.
Dave, my grandson works for a diesel shop over in Belgrade, and they run wrecker service. And this last storm on the Bozeman Pass, you heard about that?
Oh, yeah.
Electric vehicles are involved in that, and they were backed up from 19th all the way to the top of the hill going to Livingston, and then on the other side. And they went out to rescue cars, and then they got stuck. He slept 16 hours in a wrecker. Well, you got women with little kids, got people with health problems, and there they are in their electric vehicle with batteries. Here, you've got the gasoline engines. He's going to sit there all night, tank gas, and keep warm.
Okay, here's the deal. What uses power in an electric vehicle is making it go. If you have a reasonable amount of, if your battery is half full or whatever, you can sit there for a long time if all you have to do is heat the seats and the car. It's no different than a gas powered engine. If you don't have much gas and you're gonna run your heater for 12 hours, it's gonna be touch and go. But what consumes energy in an electric vehicle is making it go. They can sit there for a long time if all you're doing is heating the inside of the car and heated seats. So which raises another point, which I forgot to mention. How do they do in the winter? Two things. Mine does really well in the winter. It has a heat pump. Unless it gets really cold, I just don't notice a drop off. Physically, there has to be, because that's just the way physics are. With the Chevy Bolt, it did not have a heat pump. It had a resistive heater, like a regular electric heater. And you could be driving along, and being a skier, I'm pretty tolerant of cold. I have my heated steering wheel and my heated seat, and I'm thinking, geez, I'm getting cold, and it's like 50 degrees in the car, and I'm going to turn on the heat. So it would go from 180 miles of range to 150 miles range, just like that. So it depends on, and a lot of the cars, like I think the Mustang Mach-E and the Ford Lightning, among others, do not have heat pumps. So that's a significant factor in terms of winter range. But like I say, I just don't notice much drop off in range at all unless it gets really cold, like this cold snap we had in January. I noticed a pretty substantial, like a 25% drop off. But if the high is going to be 20 below zero, why am I going to want to go anywhere?
Can lithium batteries be recycled?
Yes, I think what they figure on recycling batteries is they can be virtually completely recycled, like 95%. And it's a technology that's developing because there just haven't been that many that have needed to be recycled yet.
Hi, I had a question about your electricity bill versus paying for gas, and if you noticed a change in if it costs more or costs less.
Well, that's another interesting discussion. When I had the Chevy Bolt, I think it was about $30 a month. But since then, I've installed solar panels, so I've paid. So that's a whole nother discussion. I produce more energy than I use. Northwestern Energy does not pay me for that, and it doesn't cycle through. So at the end of the year, at the end of the winter, I'm short. So since I installed solar panels, I think I've paid maybe $300 for electricity because it doesn't carry over. So, but the friend that I sold it to in Hamilton, I think she figures about the same, about $30 or $40 extra a month. So it's not. It's if you're charging it at home, it is way cheaper than filling a car up with gas. Even on a longer trip, if you're supercharging, and supercharging is more expensive by quite a bit than charging at home, it's still way cheaper than gas.
My question is, what are the current estimates for the lifespan of the batteries themselves? How many charges, how many miles?
I think the estimated recycle is like 1,300 cycles.
And what about the motors, aside from the battery?
You know, they're electric motors. I've read stories of people having to have had the motors replaced, but it's pretty rare. I mean, electric motors are, you know, they just don't fail very often. But they fail, sure.
Yeah, I just wondered what you thought of like Toyota Motors, where they were very early on the electrification of vehicles and hybridization, and they've kind of pivoted away, doubled down on fuel cells and even, you know, systems to make it carbon neutral within a traditional combustion engine.
Well, that's an interesting story as well. Toyota is really, and Subaru, they're kind of their partner, they're really behind the curve on electric vehicles, and it's starting to, you know, it's starting to hurt them a little bit in terms of, you know, selling cars in Europe, among other places. And I think Toyota and Subaru, just in the last few days, have announced a partnership to really focus in on better quality electric vehicles. And the Toyota electric vehicle, BZR4, whatever it is got kind of mediocre reviews. The Subaru Solterra is a pretty solid vehicle, but it does not have much in the way of range, and it also doesn't have a heat pump, so it's going to suffer in the winter. But it's a pretty solid vehicle.
Okay, last one.
Thank you. Do you think one of the concerns that people might have when transitioning from regular gas or even hybrid to full electrical is the reliability and the availability of charging stations and the availability of reliable power, particularly in those areas? I guess my question is getting more towards, you know, what do you think that's something that would keep people from going that direction because of that concern about the reliability of electricals?
Yeah, that's called range anxiety.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely a factor. And like I say, that really is the main advantage of that Tesla has still, until everybody else has incorporated that NACS charging cable. But range anxiety is a real issue. I mean, you get used to it. You kind of refocus things a little bit in terms of when you own an electric vehicle about, oh, I'm going to charge it up tonight. If I'm going, like in the Tesla, if I'm going to go to Seattle, I'll just plug in Seattle and it'll tell me every place I need to stop and how long I need to stop there. Some of the other manufacturers don't have that yet. Tesla is a step ahead in terms of where am I going to go, where do I need to stop, and how long do I need to stop there. For example, if I were going to drive from Butte to Reno, I'd probably spend an extra 2 hours on the way charging, and I know exactly where I'd have to charge. So it's a factor. You have to factor that in.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Dave.
Thanks,
We
everybody.
Appreciate it.